we are going to move right along to our next presenter. Up next, we have Niki Klein. She's a pediatric speech pathologist in New York City. During her professional experience, Niki has had the opportunity to work in inpatient and outpatient hospitals, schools, and in her private practice, Niki Klein Speech. Niki specializes in working with children who have hearing loss using spoken language, and she's currently pursuing her listening and spoken language specialist international certification. And Niki and I actually went to graduate school together, and she's guest written some of our SpeakEasy newsletters, so I really value her clinical opinion. Niki's going to be teaching us about creating an auditory-rich environment for children with hearing loss. Go for it, Niki.
All right, thank you. I'm excited to be here as well. Just get this ready to share. All right, how does that look? Good?
It looks great.
Okay. All right, so like Kyla said, my name is Niki Klein, and I'm going to be talking briefly today about creating an auditory-rich environment for children who have hearing loss and are using spoken language. So at the end of my talk today, I hope that you'll be able to describe hearing loss, the auditory hierarchy, strategies to support caregivers in creating an auditory and language-rich home, and activities to support children with hearing loss using amplification to develop their listening and spoken language skills. Approximately 3 in 1,000 babies are born each year in the US with hearing loss. So as a quick review for everyone, there are a few different types of hearing loss. There's conductive hearing loss, when there is an issue in the outer middle ear, sensory neural hearing loss, when the hair cells of the cochlea are missing or damaged, mixed hearing loss, when there is a conductive and sensory neural hearing loss, or auditory neuropathy, or also referred to as auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, or ANSD, which occurs when there's a problem with the auditory nerve transmitting the signal from the cochlea to the brain, and hearing loss can vary from normal to profound, or it can fluctuate. And these are the various degrees of hearing loss. So every person's hearing loss is unique. It could be bilateral, unilateral, sloping, or rising across various degrees. So I've included an example of an audiogram here. And you can see that, hearing losses can be sloping across various degrees. Even 2 ears can have different hearing losses. But it's important to keep in mind that normal hearing is below 20 dB. This is going to be important because the children that we're working with, once they're fit with amplification, like hearing aids or cochlear implants, the goal is for their aided thresholds to be in that normal range. So if you're not working with children who have hearing loss regularly, you might remember the speech banana from graduate school. This banana-shaped range on an audiogram that covers the frequencies and decibels that are needed to understand speech. This is a really helpful counseling tool for families to understand how hearing loss impacts their child's ability to perceive speech and language, and better understand what maybe a mild hearing loss sounds like versus a profound hearing loss. So for example, if you have a moderate hearing loss, the idea is that you would hear sound in this range and below, but without amplification, you wouldn't have access to these sounds here, which are either higher frequency sounds or softer frequency sounds. You'll notice that I've circled the LING 6 sounds on the speech banana. Those are ah, oo, e, s, and sh. And these sounds are often used as a check to make sure a child is hearing sounds across the speech frequency range, because they represent speech in the low, mid, and high frequencies. So in traditional speech and language therapy, audition is not usually addressed, and we're usually starting at this level of comprehension. But for children who have hearing loss, we need to address these auditory skills: detection, discrimination, and identification. These stages of listening development were created by Erber in the 1980s. And as the most basic definitions, detection is, I hear that. Discrimination is, that sounds different. And identification is, I recognize that sound or word. So children who have normal hearing typically need about 12 to 24 months of listening in order to develop these skills. So for example, I have a friend who has a 1-year-old, 1 year, a few months, who has normal hearing. She was giving her a bath at home, and she heard the garage door make a sound, and the little girl said, "Dada," to ask if her dad was home. So this is a great example of how we just go through these auditory skills without thinking of them all the time. So first, the little girl had to detect the sound. She had to hear the garage door. Then she had to discriminate it. So she had to know that that garage door was different from the sounds in the bathroom, like the water splashing or a rubber duck squeaking. Then she needed to identify that sound. She knows that the sound that she heard is associated with the garage door opening. And then based on context, she was able to understand, you know, I'm with my mom, it's nighttime, it must mean that dad is coming home from work too. But when children have hearing loss, they've missed out on tons of listening experiences. So they need to be directly taught all of these skills during their daily routines or in our therapy sessions. I also want everyone to kind of keep in mind with this hierarchy that even though it seems like you might move up the stages like a ladder, it should be expected that you revisit each of these stages when you're working on higher level language and listening skills. So some strategies and activities. Working with young children and their families, it's important to remind caregivers that they are their child's first and best teachers. Caregivers are an essential part of the therapeutic team, and they are the ones who are with the child all of the other hours that we are not there in our therapy sessions. So the first step is to really help caregivers to understand the impact of hearing loss on spoken language. Once they have a better understanding, then they can better support their child at home. They can also explain their hearing loss better to their friends and their families or potentially future educators who might not have as much experience with hearing loss. It's also critical that parents understand the importance of their children wearing their amplification for all waking hours. So I always tell my families, if the child's eyes are open, then the hearing aids or cochlear implants should be on. Children with normal hearing and language development don't need to be specifically taught all these skills, and they learn them through incidental learning. This refers to learning that's unplanned and just through experience and overhearing others. And that's why it's so important that children have their hearing aids on or their cochlear implants on whenever they're awake. So that little girl I was talking about, you know, no one ever said, this is the sound the garage door makes. She just learned that through her experiences. And lastly, we need to teach the caregivers the specific strategies that we're going to be using in our therapy sessions so that they can create auditory and language-rich environments at home too. So here are the strategies. A lot of these strategies overlap with traditional speech and language therapy, but some like modeling or parallel talk and self-talk Leah was just talking about, but some of the strategies are specific to working with children who have hearing loss, like cueing the child to listen, making listening easy, doing a daily listening check, presenting information auditory first or using an auditory sandwich, acoustic highlighting, and auditory closure. So the first strategy, cue to listen. Make sure to have your child's attention before presenting any sounds or speech. Cue your child to listen by saying, listen, or pointing to your ear or highlighting your ear. If you're working with a child who's a new listener, maybe it's a baby who is just fit with hearing aids or someone who just got a cochlear implant, you can go on a listening walk outside in the backyard or even in your own house and cue the individual to listen to all the sounds that they might be hearing outside or inside, like fire trucks or birds or dogs. If you're working with a more experienced listener, you can use this strategy too. So if you're about to read a book with someone, you might want to cue them to listen so that they're ready for the incoming auditory information. Making listening easy. Make listening easy for your child with hearing loss by reducing or limiting background noise such as TV, music. Speaking close to your child also reduces background noise and the effective distance on hearing. So if you're working with a new listener, if you're playing with the child, you want to make sure that you're reducing background noise by either turning off the TV or turning off music. And if you're working with an experienced listener, you might want to think about your positioning or your distance from the individual. So obviously, the closer you are to someone, the easier it is for them to hear. A LING 6 sound check. It's a simple activity to ensure your child's hearing device is working and that your child is hearing all of the speech sounds. The LING 6 sounds are A, U, E, S, Sh, because they broadly represent the speech spectrum or speech banana. Remember to do this with your child daily when they put on their devices. So if you're working with a new listener, you might just be looking at a detection response. So when you're making the LING 6 sounds, are they stopping what they're doing and looking and searching for the source of the sound? Or if it's an experienced listener, it might be more of an identification task, meaning that they can identify that sound. So if you say a LING sound, you're looking for the individual to repeat it, or just pointing at a toy that might be associated with that sound. Auditory sandwich. To help your child with hearing loss develop her auditory and language skills, provide opportunities to listen without any visual supports, like pictures or toys or gestures. First, provide your message through speaking alone. Then pause and present your message again with visual supports. Finally, repeat your message without visuals again. So if you're working with a new listener and maybe you are teaching the child some animal sounds, you might make the sound first, moo. Then present the visual too, moo. Did you hear that? The cow said moo. So you're making a nice little sandwich of that auditory, visual, auditory information. And if you're working with a more experienced listener, you can use this strategy as well. You could do it while you're reading a book. Maybe instead of showing them the cover of the book, you tell them what you're going to read first before showing them the cover. Acoustic highlighting. This involves putting emphasis on a specific sound or word when speaking with your child by changing the tone of your voice, saying it louder or saying it slower. This helps to teach your child new vocabulary, grammar, and articulation skills. So, new listener, let's say you're working on teaching them their first word. So you're going to really emphasize those suprasegmental features like pitch, duration, and loud words. Things like uh-oh or wee. Or if you're working with a more experienced listener and you're working on maybe grammatical markers, like plural S, you can emphasize and draw that S sound out at the ends of words. So hats or shirts. And auditory closure. That's when you leave out a familiar word or phrase from a repetitive phrase, song, or book and wait for the child to fill it in. For example, you would say, happy birthday to, and the child would say you, or ready, set, child would say go. This fill in the blank strategy encourages participation from children. It also provides them the opportunity to show off what they already know. So if you're working with someone who's younger or who just started listening, maybe you're just looking for them to fill in that spot with a sound or a word. So Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I. And you would just be looking for the child to do something as simple as vocalize or maybe say, oh. Whereas with a more experienced listener, you might say a common phrase that's missing a word. So drink your or brush your, and then encourage the child to fill in the blank, or you could even provide them options. So let's say you said brush your, and you gave them the options of shoes, pants, or teeth, and they had to choose the one that best fit. All of these strategies can be used in so many different activities. A lot of the activities that Leah was talking about before, like daily routines, you can point out different sounds during your daily routines or narrate what you're doing. When you're giving directions to a child, maybe you're going to provide that information auditory only, or use the auditory sandwich, or use the acoustic highlighting to emphasize what's really important in that direction. Or if you're playing games, you might present information auditory only, So for example, if you were playing, let's say Candyland, and you wouldn't show the child the card and you would just pick the card yourself, and you would tell them, no, you got red square, and then you would show them the picture after. Or if you're reading books, you could read the information first and then show the pictures. And you could also do a craft or cooking and make requests for different items without visual cues. The thing to keep in mind is that when you are doing these activities, you don't want to be testing the child's comprehension. So you do want to make sure that all the things that you're asking for are things that the child's familiar with, so that you're not testing their comprehension, and instead you are testing and working on their auditory skills. If anyone is interested in learning more about hearing loss, these are some great resources. These 2 textbooks are great, or Hearing First has a lot of online courses, and all the cochlear implant companies have some great resources to share with families as well. Or if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can send me an email, or you can follow me on Instagram on Niki Klein Speech. I will be posting the visuals of the different strategies if you want to share them with your families. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Niki. That's an area that a lot of us don't get to learn a lot about. So that was really fun.